kind of an awkward segue, don't you think, to go to Madeleine Albright after this issue of the Time magazine cover? But she also has a great sense of humor, so I know she'll appreciate the segue. Her new book, Prague Winter, just recently out. Of course, former Secretary of State, and also has what number book is this, Secretary Albright? I can't remember. Fourth book?
Five, Laura, and it is kind of a weird segue, but I'm very happy to be on with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. I couldn't make it any more awkward, so I just have to go with it. Don't worry, I won't ask you about the Time magazine cover. But I'm fascinated by this book because we love to encourage people in our listening audience who've gone through high school, many obviously college graduates, graduate school, but many have forgotten their history or didn't really learn it in the beginning. History of pre-war Europe, post-war Europe, and especially during the Nazi invasion and the Nazi spread across Europe. I was just talking to a friend of mine about France, and people don't even remember what happened in France. But tell us why you decided to write this now, after a long life in public service and rediscovering your own roots. Why now?
Well, as you mentioned, I have written other books, and when I left office, I wrote kind of a more standard memoir as Secretary of State, although I did have a lot about my early life, and then several other books later. But I thought that, I needed to finish the story, and also what I tried to do, Laura, in this book is kind of have three levels of it, that the central core is a family story. My father was a Czechoslovak diplomat. We spent the war in England and later came to America. And then the second layer is the historical one, exactly of the period you're talking about, which is an incredible period in terms of how we got into World War II, how it ended, how the Red Army liberated half of Europe, and the effects that continues to have on our life today. And then the third layer is about how difficult decisions are to make in terms of the right moral decision, and that we think things are always black and white, which they aren't, and how important leadership is, that we can't have leaders who operate on wishful thinking. So those are the layers of it, and I thought that it was good to do it now and kind of put those pieces together.
Few temptations are more damaging to a leader than to act on hopes instead of facts. I think of all the lines in this book, that's one of my favorites. We're going to stay with Madeleine Albright, the author of Prague Winter, on the Laura Ingraham Show. We're also going to ask her about what's happening in Syria and on the Chen situation in China. As Secretary of State, how do you navigate these complicated waters? She will continue with us. Madeleine Albright on the Laura Ingraham Show.
On every page in June when I write
Madeleine Albright wrote a book, another one, it's her fifth, Prague Winter, a personal story of remembrance and war, 1937 to 1948. Of course, former Secretary of State. And I have to ask you, we want to get into more of the book, Madam Secretary, but this new account of Bill Clinton trying to encourage Hillary Clinton to run against Barack Obama in 2012, and his belief that Barack Obama is, quote, amateurish. Your reaction to that Ed Klein book?
I haven't seen the book. I don't know. I do know that obviously President Clinton supported his wife when she was running, but I think he, like all the rest of us, know that she's is being a fabulous Secretary of State, and that she hasn't made up her mind about what's next.
Do you think that would be possible, that he would think Barack Obama is kind of amateurish on some of these issues?
I would be very surprised if he thought that.
Fascinating. The issue of what you believe we should take from the European experience, 1937, 1948. And the lessons from that period of time as applied to today. And you said that things are not always black and white, things evolve, things change, but you have to operate on the basis of the facts that as exist at the time versus the hopes that you have in your heart. How would that apply to what's happening, for instance, today in Syria? We saw this horrible explosion yesterday in Syria, concerns now that al-Qaeda might be gaining a foothold there.
Well, I think, one of the things we were talking about is hope versus facts. I mean, Chamberlain hoped that Hitler would be different, and not really, it wasn't fact-based. I think that the issue in terms of how Syria looks now, I think that it has been very clear, President Obama said this, others have said it, is that Bashar Assad has to leave. That is fact-based because he's lost his legitimacy, and in fact, violent things are happening in Syria. I think the other thing that comes out of the lesson of World War II is that it is important to get full kind of international support for something, that it's very hard when large countries make decisions over the heads of small countries and there's not kind of an international approach to it. And then I do think, and this is the hard part, and I must say personally this is hard for me to watch, is that I have said that people said they didn't know what was going on, that the Germans were doing to the Jews and others in Europe, and we now know the terrible things that are going on in Syria. So the question is, what method is there to make sure that Assad leaves, that the international community is supportive of what goes on, and what the United States can do that really will make a difference? And I think that what's going on is a very appropriate decision-making process in terms of which method, which tool to use.
And so it's a matter of confronting the evil that we know exists, but that we can confront effectively. Is that what you're saying? Because there's evil everywhere, right? I mean, there's evil in Africa. There's evil. Evil exists everywhere. If you believe in evil, and I do, it exists everywhere in life. Period. But when we're seeing it play out, and yet there's such a public distaste now and a weariness for war in the United States. How do you move as a president of the United States, understanding that?
Laura, it's so interesting because I'm asked this a lot, and sometimes in front of very large audiences, and when somebody says, we need to do something in Syria, and nobody applauds. I mean, I know what it's like when people, the American public wants us to be somewhere, because I saw that when I was working on the Balkans. And I think it's exactly what you've said, which is that people are weary with Afghanistan and Iraq, and there are so many places. I mean, somebody said, so why aren't we doing something in Mali? So the issue is, this sounds rather clinical, but kind of the Do Ability Doctrine. I mean, can you actually get something done? Who does it? And what is the long-term effect of it? And what I understand is going on now is that there are a variety of things in terms of international sanctions, humanitarian assistance, trying to have contact with the Syrian opposition group. The President has asked the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs for contingency plans. So they are looking at everything, kind of looking at what I call it the Do Ability Doctrine. Nobody else does, but kind of, what support is there? Will the Arab states be supportive as they were on Libya? But what I also say is just because you can't do everything everywhere doesn't mean you do nothing anywhere. So,
well, what did we do in Iran with the Twitter revolution that we hoped would take root, and which a lot of people, including myself, believe we didn't do enough to support?
Well, it's hard again. Same issue. Very difficult. And I think that there in Iran also, what we're doing is putting kind of the international squeeze on the government there. The thing that's interesting is the sanctions regimes, both against Iran and Syria, are pretty tough and are deliberately aimed at those who are doing terrible things, in terms of making sure that their economic lifeline is cut off, that they can't travel, that they can't be engaged in international financial transactions, and so and speaking out on behalf of those who are dissidents, who are arguing against the system. But I think these are very, very hard issues because we can't always accomplish what we want to.
Well, I know you're loath to criticize the current administration. I think that's classy. I think that's refreshing, frankly. But nevertheless, I mean, we are seeing an Iran closer than ever to nuclear capability. At least that's what the international observers and inspectors have told us. So how close, we don't really know. And so I think we do have to ask the question of what next. I mean, what else can we do if Russia continues to give aid and comfort, if China continues to offer some technological help to the Iranians? What leverage do we have today when we have such a weak economy and we depend on China for so much of our bond purchases and the like?
What you're saying, which I think is so smart in terms of looking at what the interaction of all these issues are. I think a lot of people just look at one tiny piece and then don't think about it in these kind of very large concentric circles that you have raised. I think on Iran, what has happened, which I find interesting, is as a result, I believe, of the sanctions and they're international. The Europeans are into this. All of a sudden, the Iranians agreed to having these talks, the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, in order to look at trying to figure out what solution there could be to them not having a nuclear weapons capability. The thing that's hard about this is the Iranians are signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have every right to have a peaceful nuclear program, but they have to have full inspections. And so the fact that those talks are going on, I think, is a positive sign. And then also, again, same thing, nobody has taken any tool off the table. And I think we've got to keep those there, and then also push the Chinese and the Russians on this issue. I fully agree with you on that.
Do you think the Chen issue has been handled well? I mean, the way this thing went down, and he's left in the hospital now. Apparently, his relatives are being harassed. The latest news out today, his one relative is being charged with manslaughter, and it turns out it's just completely bogus. And what are your very brief thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think that it was a very difficult issue. I mean, all of a sudden, this comes in the middle of what are supposed to be very important talks on both political and economic issues, the other things that you were talking about, and this happens. I was not impressed with the first round of this. That's something in terms of what happened when he went to the hospital, whether there just was not enough understanding of what was supposed to happen. I do think Secretary Clinton, again, from what I read in the papers, raised it in the middle of these talks and kept pushing on it in order to get this newer arrangement. And I think that the U.S. government is going to keep pushing. But part of the problem here is trying to figure out if the Chinese will live up to what they said they would do. And so I certain parts of it, I think, looked kind of as if they hadn't kind of looked at all the aspects of the deal the first go-round. But I really think that Secretary Clinton's involvement in it and raising the issue in the talks was very important.
If one of your staffers had dumped someone like Chen off at the hospital without any American presence left behind with him, would you be happy about that?
No. But that's why I wish I knew more, because it doesn't sound like our diplomats. I mean, the truth is that our team in China are really professional diplomats and know what they're supposed to do. So I am kind of holding my thoughts on it till I find out a little bit more about it. But absolutely, no, I didn't know. There are parts of this that are very complicated, and I don't quite understand. Various parts, Laura, in terms of how it was arranged for him to escape. There was some group in the United States that,
helping him in Texas.
Yeah, so there are a lot of pieces of this that I personally would like to know more about.
We have Madeleine Albright's book, Prague Winter, featured on our website, A Personal Story of Remembrance and War, 1937 to 1948. And I read a lot of history books, and I feel like I've learned something and I haven't gotten through all of it. Page 263 is where I am. Secretary Albright, I appreciate you joining us. You and I disagree on a lot, but you're always a stand-up person. You come on and you discuss these issues with us, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I appreciate talking to you. Thanks, Laura.